Okay, I want you to look at the coffee mug on your table. Or if you're driving, just think about the steering wheel in your hands. It's obviously there.
It's there. You can touch it.
It has weight, it takes up space. If you tap on it, it makes a sound. Now, let's shift gears completely. Think about the number 7.
Oh.
Not the symbol 7 written down, but the actual number itself, the concept. Does that exist?
You are starting us off on some very dangerous ground today. That is a question that has probably ruined dinner parties for 2,000 years.
I know, but stick with me for a second. I can count to 7. I can see 7 apples on a counter, but I can't, touch 7.
Right.
I can't put 7 under a microscope. And yet, if I say there are prime numbers between 4 and 10, that statement is true. And for it to be true, it has to be about something. So in some weird way, numbers must exist, but clearly not in the same way my coffee mug exists.
And just like that, you've walked right off the edge of physics and have plummeted straight into metaphysics.
But today, we're not just doing metaphysics, we're actually going a layer deeper. Or is it a layer higher? I'm not sure.
We're going meta. We're doing metametaphysics.
Which, I have to admit, it sounds a little bit like a stutter.
It does. It really does. But think of it this way. Metaphysics asks, what is the structure of reality? What exists? Do numbers exist? Do souls exist?
The big, classic questions.
The big questions. Metametaphysics, on the other hand, asks, wait a minute, how are you even supposed to answer those questions? Are these questions even meaningful, or are we just, arguing about definitions?
So it's about the tools we're using.
Exactly. What methodology lets us map reality? It's the inquiry into the inquiry itself.
So it's like the difference between playing a game of chess and stopping to read the rule book to see if the game is actually fair in the first place.
That is a perfect analogy. We're looking at the rule book of reality. And for this deep dive, we're basing our discussion on An Introduction to Metaphysics by Tuomas E. Taco.
And our mission today is pretty specific. We want to move beyond just listing things that exist.
Right, that's just a cosmic grocery list.
Yeah. Milk, bread, electrons. We want to understand the foundations. We're looking for things like structure and grounding and fundamentality.
We're not just shopping. We're trying to inspect the architecture of the grocery store itself.
I like that. And to do that, we have to start with a case study. A detective story, actually, Sherlock Holmes.
Ah, the resident patient of Baker Street.
So let's apply our little existence test to him. Does Sherlock Holmes exist?
The standard, common sense answer is, no, of course not. He's a fictional character. Arthur Conan Doyle made him up. He's not flesh and blood.
Agreed. 100%. But we can say true things about him, right? We can say Sherlock Holmes is a detective.
Yes, that's true.
We can say Sherlock Holmes lives at 221B Baker Street. We can even compare him to real people. Sherlock Holmes is smarter than I am. Now, if he doesn't exist, if he is a total zero, how can he have properties? How can he be a detective if there is no he to be anything?
You are poking at a very, very old wound in philosophy. This is the problem of Plato's beard.
Plato's beard. I've always loved that name for it. It sounds like a craft beer or a hipster band.
It does. It was a term coined by W.V. Quine, who is one of the absolute giants of 20th century analytic philosophy. He used the metaphor to describe this problem of non-being.
Okay.
He said that non-being must be, in some sense, otherwise, what is it that there is not? It's like this tangled beard, and philosophers have gotten really dirty and tangled up trying to sort it out.
So the idea is, if you can just talk about Pegasus or Sherlock Holmes or the Easter Bunny, just naming them seems to summon them into some weird kind of existence.
Exactly. Just so you can have the pleasure of then saying they don't exist.
Right. Because if I say Sherlock Holmes does not exist, the subject of my sentence is Sherlock Holmes. I have to point at the subject to say something about it. So what am I pointing at? Nothing.
Precisely. And if you point at nothing, you aren't really saying anything meaningful. So for the sentence to work, the nothing must be something. And all of a sudden, your reality is just cluttered with fictional detectives and winged horses and, square circles.
Which brings us right to part 1. The historical foundation. This is really the origin story of how we do modern metametaphysics, and it's basically a heavyweight boxing match between two philosophers, W.V. Quine and Rudolf Carnap.
It is the clash that really defined the entire field for decades. So let's start with Quine. In 1948, he writes this paper called On What There Is.
And this is the paper, right?
It is perhaps the most famous single paper in all of analytic metaphysics. And he starts it with that ultimate question. What is there?
And he gives the shortest, maybe most annoying answer in history.
He does. He just says, Everything.
Everything. Okay, now I have to push back a little on this. That sounds like a total cop-out. It sounds like a tautology. If I ask you, hey, what's in the fridge? And you say everything that is in the fridge, you haven't told me anything useful at all.
It sounds trivial on the surface, I agree, but it's actually a very powerful logical maneuver. What Quine is saying is that to be and to exist are exactly the same thing.
Ah.
For him, you cannot say there is something that does not exist. It's a flat-out contradiction in terms. If you can talk about it, if you can refer to it, then it is part of everything.
Okay, so if everything exists, then how does he shave Plato's beard? How does he solve the Sherlock Holmes problem? Doesn't he have to admit that Pegasus exists, since we can talk about Pegasus?
No. And this is where his genius comes in. He cleans up this whole mess using a technique called paraphrasing, which he adapted from Bertrand Russell's theory of descriptions.
Paraphrasing.
Yeah. Quine says we get tricked by our own language. We have this deep-seated intuition that every name like Pegasus or Sherlock must have a corresponding object out there in the world. A name is like a luggage tag. If there's a tag, there must be a suitcase for it to be on.
But Quine says the tag is a lie. Or at least it can be.
Precisely. He says we need to rephrase the sentence to get rid of the name altogether. Let's take your example. Pegasus flies.
Okay.
If we use the name Pegasus, we are stuck in Plato's beard. So Quine says, forget the name, turn it into a description. What is Pegasus?
Well, he's the winged horse that was captured by Bellerophon in Greek mythology.
Good. So we can translate Pegasus flies into something like, the thing that is a winged horse is flying.
Okay, I see the switch. We went from a proper noun, a name, to just a description of properties.
Exactly. Now we can analyze the logical structure of that new sentence. It really means there is an six such that $6 is a winged horse and $6 is flying. Now we can just look at the world and ask, is there such an S?
No. We can look at all the horses, none of them have wings. We look at all the birds, none of them are horses. The statement is false.
Exactly. It is simply false. But, and this is the absolute key, it is still meaningful. We didn't need a ghost Pegasus or a fictional Pegasus for the sentence to make sense.
We just needed a placeholder, the variable $6, and a description that happened to not match anything in reality.
Yes. So he turned an ontological problem, a problem about what exists, into a much simpler logical problem about how we structure our sentences.
That's incredibly clever.
And this cleverness allows Quine to maintain what he famously called a desert landscape.
I love that image. A desert landscape. It's so evocative.
It's his aesthetic preference for reality. He wanted an ontology that was sparse, clean, and dry. He did not want a lush, overgrown jungle reality that was teeming with possibilities, unactualized potentials, fictional characters, abstract objects, and so on. He wanted just the hard facts.
Just the bare minimum. But if he's so strict, how do we decide what gets to stay in his desert? I mean, he can't just kick everything out. We need atoms. We probably need numbers for physics to work.
And that brings us to his famous rule, Quine's criterion of ontological commitment.
Which sounds like a very serious legal contract you'd have to sign.
It is, a contract with your own theories. His slogan was, to be is to be the value of a bound variable.
Okay, hold on. Bound variable. That is bringing back some traumatic flashbacks to high school algebra. We need to translate that into plain English.
Let's do it. Think of a variable, that $6 we used, as just a placeholder, like the word it or something. When you formulate your best scientific theory, let's say it's biology, you write down sentences like, there are dogs.
Okay.
In the language of logic, that looks like there is an 11 such that $6 is a dog.
Right. So $6 is the placeholder for whatever thing is a dog.
And the there is part is what logicians call the quantifier. It binds the variable. It's the part of the sentence that says, I am serious about this $6. This $6 is real. I'm committing to it.
So Quine's rule is, you are only committed to the existence of things that you absolutely must quantify over to make your best theories true.
You've got it. So if your best theory of physics says there are electrons, and you can't find any clever way to paraphrase that sentence to get rid of the there are, then you're stuck with electrons. You have to let them into your desert landscape.
But if you say something like, there is a possibility that I will go to the gym later, Quine would raise an eyebrow.
He'd say, hold on. Do we really need possibilities to be existing things? Or can we paraphrase that? If you can just rewrite it to say, I might go to the gym, without using possibility as a noun, then you don't have to let possibilities into your desert. You've successfully kept the landscape clean.
So Quine is the ultimate minimalist. He's the Marie Kondo of metaphysics. Does this abstract entity spark joy in my scientific theory? No. Then I thank it for its service and throw it out.
That is a surprisingly and wonderfully accurate comparison, but every great champion has a challenger, and his was Rudolf Carnap.
Carnap, the great skeptic.
Carnap was what's known as a logical positivist. He looked at all these grand metaphysical debates, realism versus idealism, one versus many, and he didn't see a profound search for truth.
What did he see?
He saw people getting hopelessly confused by their own language. He didn't think we were discovering the furniture of the universe. He thought we were just arguing about how to talk.
This is where his big distinction between internal and external questions comes in, right?
Yes, this is Carnap's most famous and enduring contribution to this whole debate. An internal question is a question you ask inside a pre-agreed framework.
A framework being what, exactly?
A framework is just a system of rules, definitions, and logic. Mathematics is a framework. The English language is a framework. The science of physics is a framework.
Okay, give me an example of a purely internal question.
If I ask you, working entirely inside the framework of standard mathematics, is there a prime number greater than 1 million?
Yes. Obviously, I don't even need to find one. I can just prove it using the rules of math. It's a trivial question for a mathematician.
Right. The answer is trivial. It's analytic. It just follows from the rules of the game. But, Carnap says, philosophers make this huge mistake of trying to step outside the framework to ask the external question.
They stand outside the math game and ask.
But do numbers really exist? Out there, in the world, independent of us humans?
And Carnap's response to that question is that it's garbage.
He thinks it's a pseudo-question. It lacks what he called cognitive content. He argues that when we ask, do numbers exist, externally, we aren't actually asking a factual question about the world. We're asking a pragmatic question.
Pragmatic, how?
The question we're really asking is the language of mathematics a useful tool for us to adopt?
So it's not about truth. It's about utility. It's about whether this framework helps us build bridges or launch rockets.
Precisely. Let's take a non-math example to make it clearer. Consider the question, is the economy real?
It feels like a very deep, very philosophical question.
Carnap would just analyze it. Internal to the framework of economics, of course the economy exists. It has interest rates, GDP, recessions. We can measure it and talk about it.
Right.
But if you step outside and ask, is the economy a physical object like a rock? The answer is clearly no. So if you then ask, well, does the economy exist, really? Carnap would just say, what you are asking is whether it is useful for us to talk about things using the language of economics. And the answer is yes, it's incredibly useful.
That is remarkably deflationary. It just takes all the epic wind out of the sails of metaphysics. Quine thinks we are intrepid explorers hunting for the bedrock of reality.
And Carnap thinks we're just choosing which apps to install on our phone.
Should I use the physics app for this problem or the psychology app?
And Carnap calls this language pluralism. We can use different linguistic frameworks for different purposes. We can use physicist language to talk about atoms and art critic language to talk about beauty. Neither one is more true than the other. They're just different tools for different jobs.
So we have this fundamental showdown. Quine the realist saying we must find the one true structure of reality, but let's keep it simple.
Versus Carnap the deflationist saying, relax everyone, it's all just language choices. Pick the one that works best for you.
And that debate really sets the stage for everything that follows in metametaphysics, because before we can even start to argue about God or time or causation, we have to decide, are we Quinians, looking for the one true list of existing things?
Or are we Carnapians, just negotiating our vocabulary?
And central to that negotiation, and to Quine's whole project, is a specific tool, the symbol we used earlier, the backwards E.
The existential quantifier.
Yeah.
And that leads us to part 2, the toolkit. We need to pop the hood on this symbol exists.
So for Quine, as we said, it just means existence. And for him, it's a univocal term.
Univocal, meaning one voice or one meaning. Quine firmly believes the word exists works in exactly the same way for everything it applies to. An electron exists. The number 7 exists. A chair exists. It's like a binary switch. It's on or it's off.
No in between.
There are no degrees of existence. You can't kind of exist.
But surely that feels a bit restrictive. I mean, my dreams exist, but they don't exist in the same way my bed exists. And this is where the Meinongian challenge comes charging in.
Alexis Meinong. He is the ghost that Quine was trying to exorcise. He's the one who let Plato's beard get so tangled in the first place. Meinong had a much more lush, overgrown, jungle-like ontology.
A maximalist.
The ultimate maximalist. He argued that we need to make a crucial distinction between Sein, which is German for being or existence, and So-Sein, which means being so.
Being so. So, having properties.
Exactly. Menon pointed out that we can think about, for instance, the Golden Mountain. It doesn't exist. There is no such mountain made of solid gold on Earth.
But we can still say things about it. It is golden, and it is a mountain. It has properties.
So Menon argued it must have sign. It must have properties even if it lacks sign or existence.
Wait, so he genuinely thinks there are things that do not exist?
Yes. He thinks there are things that have no existence.
That sounds like a straight-up contradiction. There are things that are not.
To a Quinian, it absolutely is a contradiction. It's word salad. But to a Menongian, or a more modern philosopher who calls themselves a non-aist, it makes perfect sense.
Oh?
They argue that the quantifier, the there is part of our language, should be understood as being much wider than the concept of existence.
Okay, give me a sentence where this actually matters, because right now it sounds like pure philosophical word games.
Okay. Consider this perfectly normal English sentence. Some characters in the Bible existed, and some did not.
Okay. Seems fine. Pontius Pilate? Historical records suggest he existed. Goliath? Maybe not so much.
Now look at the grammar of that sentence. You start with some characters. You're using the word some to group them all together into one category.
Right. I'm quantifying over the whole group of biblical characters.
Now, if Quine is right, and some always implies existence, then when you say some characters did not exist, you are technically saying there exist some characters that do not exist.
Which is complete nonsense. A contradiction.
Exactly. But the original sentence, some characters in the Bible existed and some did not, sounds perfectly sensible to any English speaker. So the non-atheist says, aha, our natural language proves Quine is wrong. We can quantify over, count, and talk about non-existent things all the time without our logic exploding.
So the entire fight is over, the meaning of the word is. Sounds depressingly familiar.
It never, ever stops being relevant. Now, there's another way to look at this whole toolkit. We can try to step out of our messy natural language and go into what's called the ontology room.
This is a metaphor that comes from the philosopher Ted Sider, right? Or is it connected to Eli Hirsch?
It connects them both, really.
Mm-hmm.
Eli Hirsch argues for something he calls quantifier variance. He thinks that the meaning of exists or there is just shifts depending on the context or the language game we're playing.
Like how the word bank means one thing to a fisherman and a completely different thing to a banker.
But even more subtle than that. Imagine we're looking at a statue that's made of a lump of clay. I ask you, how many objects are on the pedestal?
One. A statue.
A certain kind of philosopher might say, no, there are two objects there. There's the statue and there's the lump of clay.
Why on earth would they do that? They're the same physical thing.
Are they? Think about it. If I take a hammer and smash the statue into a flat pancake, the statue ceases to exist. But the lump of clay still exists. It's just flat now. If they have different persistence conditions, different death conditions, they must be two different things. So the philosopher says, voila, here are two distinct objects occupying the exact same space.
And what does Hirsch say about this argument?
Hirsch says this is a classic verbal dispute. He thinks in plain English we count one object, but in metaphysics nerd speak or mereology speak, we count two. Neither is right or wrong. They're just different languages with different counting rules.
So to solve this, we all agree to go into the ontology room.
Right. The ontology room is a metaphorical space where we try to escape this verbal mess. The idea is that we can create a special hyper-rigorous language, let's call it ontologies, where we stipulate exactly what the quantifier means. We leave our loose, sloppy, everyday English at the door.
And inside the ontology room, we're not just asking what exists in our normal way of talking. We're asking what fundamentally exists, what really exists.
And this is where Ted Sider brings in his brilliant joint carving metaphor.
Yes, I love this one.
Sider's a realist. He absolutely hates the idea that it's all just verbal games. He wants to know what the world is really like, independent of us. He uses Plato's metaphor. Philosophy should aim to carve nature at its joints.
Like a master butcher carving a chicken. You cut where the bones and ligaments naturally separate. You don't just hack through the middle of a solid bone.
That is the perfect image. Sider says some of our words carve reality at the joints. The word electron, for example. That seems to pick out a real structural feature of the universe. The universe itself seems to care about electrons.
But what about a word like cool people?
Does the universe have a fundamental force that detects coolness? Is there a coolness particle or field?
I mean, in my high school, it certainly felt like a fundamental force. But physically, no. Cool is a social construct. It's an arbitrary grouping we made up.
So Sider would say electron is a joint carving term. It's a substantive term. The cool person is not. It's a convention. So if we have debate about do electrons exist, we're doing real metaphysics. But if we debate is Brad Pitt cool, we're just sharing opinions. Sider thinks we should only worry about the joint carving terms.
Okay, so we've got the history, we've got Quine versus Carnap, and we've got the toolkit, we've got the quantifier, and this idea of joint carving. But it feels like more recently the vibe in metaphysics has shifted. The cool kids, the joint carving kids, aren't asking, does X exist anymore? They're asking a different question.
They are, and this is part 3, the shift to grounding independence. The central figure who really kicked off this shift is Quine.
So what was Kit Fine's problem with simple existence questions?
He argued that they are often too easy, too trivial to be philosophically interesting. Let's go back to numbers for a second. Do numbers exist? Well, if you accept the framework of mathematics for doing physics, the answer is just yes, end of story. It's boring.
Okay.
Or take a singleton set.
Right, a singleton set. That's just a set with one single member in it.
Exactly. Take Socrates, a real person who existed. Now take the set that contains only Socrates. The set Socrates. Does that set exist?
Well, if Socrates exists, and we accept that sets are a legitimate mathematical tool, then yeah, sure, the set Socrates exists.
Exactly. It's automatic. It's a freebie. Fine says, we aren't learning anything deep or profound by saying, yes, the set exists. The interesting question is, what is the relationship between Socrates and the set?
And that relationship is what he calls grounding.
Yes. Grounding is, at its heart, metaphysical explanation. It answers the question, in virtue of what is this other thing, true or existent?
In virtue of, I like that phrase.
The set Socrates exists in virtue of Socrates existing. Socrates is the ground. The set is what is grounded. You can feel the hierarchy there. Socrates is more fundamental than the set that contains him.
Okay, let's try a physical example to make it concrete. What about water?
Perfect. We have a water molecule, H2O. We have hydrogen atoms and an oxygen atom. The water molecule exists in virtue of those atoms being arranged and bonded in a specific way. The atoms ground the molecule.
Now, I need to be super clear here. Is this the same thing as causation? Did the atoms cause the water to exist?
No. And this is an absolutely crucial distinction. Causation is usually about a sequence of events over time. I strike a match, and a second later there's a fire. The strike caused the fire.
Okay.
But grounding is usually simultaneous. The atoms don't exist, and then later the water molecule pops into being. The atoms are the water molecule. They're making it water right now. It's a vertical relationship of constitution, not a horizontal timeline of events.
A vertical explanation. I really like that way of putting it. It's about layers of reality, not a sequence of events.
And like any good system of explanation, grounding is thought to have a kind of logic to it. There are 3 big rules that usually apply: asymmetry, irreflexivity, and transitivity.
All right, let's break them down. Asymmetry.
If A grounds B, then B cannot ground A. If the atoms ground the water molecule cannot turn around and ground the atoms. You can't have a circular foundation. The explanatory arrow only points one way.
Makes total sense. Okay, irreflexivity.
Nothing grounds itself. You cannot be your own explanation. You can't pull yourself up by your own metaphysical bootstraps. A thing's existence needs a reason outside of itself.
Also seems pretty solid. And finally, transitivity. This is usually the safe one in logic. If A leads to B and B leads to C,
then A leads to C. Exactly. The idea is that if A grounds B and B in turn grounds C, then A must also ground C. It forms a nice, neat explanatory chain.
But I sense a but coming. I feel like this is going to be more complicated.
There is always a but in philosophy, isn't there? Transitivity runs into some famous and really tricky counterexamples, and the most well-known one involves a beer in a fridge.
Finally, a philosophical example I can deeply and personally relate to.
Let's trace the grounding chain. We have 3 facts. Fact A, the fundamental laws of physics exist. Fact B, this specific glass bottle of beer is stable and solid and not falling apart. And fact C, the statement, there is beer in the fridge, is true.
Okay, so the laws of physics, A, ground the stability and coherence of the glass bottle. B, without the laws of physics, the bottle would just dissolve into a cloud of random particles.
Correct. A grounds B.
And the physical presence of that bottle of beer in the fridge, B, grounds the truth of the statement, there is beer in the fridge, C.
Yes. B grounds C. So if transitivity holds, A must ground C. The fundamental laws of physics directly explain why the statement, there is beer in the fridge, is true.
Wait a minute, that feels wrong somehow.
Why? What's your intuition telling you?
Because the laws of physics don't care about my beer, the laws of physics are exactly the same whether the fridge is empty or full of beer. It feels like a massive leap. The laws of physics allow the beer to exist, they make it possible, but they don't explain why it's there. I put the beer in the fridge. That's the explanation.
Exactly. You just put your finger on the breakdown. It feels like a category error. The laws of physics are what we might call an enabling condition, but are they the ground? This whole puzzle suggests that maybe grounding isn't always transitive. We need to be really careful about distinguishing between what makes this possible and what makes this specific thing true.
This leads really nicely into the idea of ontological dependence then, because it sounds like things can depend on other things in very different ways.
Taco breaks this down into two incredibly useful categories: rigid and generic dependence. This is a super useful tool for, mental modeling of the world.
Okay, let's start with rigid dependence.
This is when an object X cannot possibly exist without a specific other object Y. Our old friend, the set Socrates, is rigidly dependent on Socrates himself. If Socrates had never existed, or if he ceased to exist, that specific set is gone. It needs him and only him.
Got it. It's tied to a particular individual, so what's generic dependence?
This is when X depends on something of type Y existing, but not on any specific individual Y. Think about electricity.
Okay, the current flowing through the wire to power this microphone.
Right. That electrical current absolutely depends on electrons. It can't exist without them. But does it depend on this specific electron right here, zipping past at this very nanosecond?
No, of course not. New electrons are flowing into the wire from the power plant all the time. One leaves, another one arrives. The current is still the current.
Exactly. It is generically dependent on the existence of electrons. It needs a supply of electron stuff, but it doesn't care about the individuals.
That distinction is huge. I feel like that must apply to biological species, too. The species Homo sapiens depends on there being humans around, but it doesn't depend on me specifically. If I die, sadly, the species continues just fine.
Correct. You are generically necessary for the species, but not rigidly necessary. Sorry to have to break it to you.
Ouch. Metaphysically expendable. My ego is bruised.
There's one more important type. Identity dependence. It's a bit different. This is where you can't even define what X is without mentioning Y.
Oh, like the word siblings.
Yes, that's the classic example. Try to define the word sibling without mentioning the concept of parents.
You can't do it. A sibling is someone who shares parents. It's built into the very definition.
So the very identity of the concept is tied to another concept. It's not caused by it. It's not even really grounded by it in the same way. It's defined by it.
So we have this massive, intricate web of dependence. Sets depend on members. Water depends on atoms. Siblings depend on parents. Everything is leaning on everything else. And this just begs the ultimate question. Where does it all stop? What is at the bottom of the pile holding everything else up?
And welcome to part 4, the structure of reality and fundamentality.
We usually visualize this as a pyramid or a cone, right?
Yes. At the top, you have the wide part, which is the macro world.
Yeah.
You, me, tables, chairs, galaxies. As you go down the cone, things get smaller and more fundamental. We go from societies to people to organs to cells to molecules to atoms to subatomic particles.
And the basic assumption for most of history has been that there is a floor, a basement level, a final bottom.
That is the traditional view of Mariological atomism. It's the view that there's a bottom level composed of simples. And simples are things that have no proper parts. They are the ultimate indivisible Lego bricks of the universe.
But what if there isn't a floor? What if there's no basement?
That is the nightmare scenario for a certain kind of philosopher. That is the possibility of a gunky ontology.
Gunk. I swear, philosophers have the best words for these things.
Gunk is just matter that is infinitely divisible. Imagine you have a particle. You take the world's sharpest knife and you slice it in half. You get 2 smaller particles. You take one of those and slice it. You get even smaller ones. And you just keep slicing. Forever.
It's an infinite descent. It really is turtles all the way down.
But think about the metaphysical implications of that. We defined fundamental as the bottom level. If there is no bottom level, is anything fundamental?
Wow, it feels like the whole universe is just floating on nothing. If the table depends on the wood, and the wood depends on the cellulose fibers, and the fibers on the molecules, and the molecules on the atoms, and the atoms on the quarks, if that chain never ever hits bedrock, does the explanation ever actually land anywhere?
That is the deep philosophical crisis of infinite descent. It suggests that reality might literally be an abyss. There's no ultimate ground.
Okay, let's bring in the heavy hitters. What does physics have to say? Does modern science support the Lego brick view or the dunk view?
It actually supports something even weirder than either of those. And this is our little scientific interlude. Philosophers of physics like James Ladyman and Don Ross, in their book Everything Must Go, argue that fundamental physics has destroyed the very idea of little things altogether.
How so? What do they mean?
It comes down to things like quantum entanglement.
The famous spooky action at a distance.
The very same. In our classical everyday thinking, we imagine two particles like two tiny billiard balls. They are separate, independent individuals. But in quantum mechanics, if two particles become entangled, they can lose their individuality. You literally cannot describe the state of particle A without also describing the state of particle B, no matter how far apart they are. They become a single system.
So they aren't two separate things anymore. They are one smeared out field of probability.
That's a good way to put it. Ladyman and Ross argue for a view called ontic structural realism. They say, look, the particles themselves aren't fundamental. The relations between them are fundamental. The mathematical structure is what's real. The little nodes in the web are just artifacts of the way we look at it.
That is completely mind-bending. It's like saying marriage is a real fundamental thing, but spouses don't actually exist.
That is a brilliant analogy.
Yes.
Imagine a universe where the marriage is the fundamental unit of reality and the husband and wife are just derivative shadows that are cast by that relationship. That is essentially structural realism.
So in that world, we don't need a bottom level of tiny balls. We just need a fundamental web of mathematics.
Precisely. And this actually leads to a clever way to save infinite descent from being a total disaster for explanation. It's a concept called boring infinite descent.
Boring sounds safe. I like boring and safe when we're talking about bottomless pits.
Think of a fractal, like the Mandelbrot set. You zoom into it and you see a certain shape. You zoom in further on a little piece of it and you see the exact same shape, just smaller. You can zoom in forever and it's always the same structure repeating at different scales.
Okay. So the idea is maybe the universe is like that. Maybe there are atoms inside of atoms inside of atoms, but it's the same basic physical structure all the way down.
If that's true, then we don't need a final brick. We just need to understand the rule of the fractal. If we understand the pattern, we understand the whole universe, even if it has no bottom. The explanation doesn't get lost in an abyss. It just finds its home in the repeating structure.
That is surprisingly comforting. We don't need a floor. We just need a formula.
And this leads to Omastako, the author of our source, to suggest a broader definition of fundamentality. He calls it generic ontological fundamentality. We should be looking for atoms. We should be looking for ontologically minimal elements.
And those elements might be particles.
Or they might be repeating fractal patterns. Or maybe, and this is the view of the monist, the only truly fundamental thing is the entire universe as a whole.
The top of the cone is actually the foundation, the one.
Yes. The universe comes first as a single unified whole. All the parts we see, stars, planets, people, are just abstractions we carve out of that whole.
We have gone from simple numbers all the way to fractal gunk and cosmic monism. But I have to pause here. We are sitting here talking. We aren't in a lab. We aren't smashing particles together. How can we possibly know any of this?
And this is the final crucial piece of the puzzle. Part 5, epistemology, the study of knowledge itself. How do we even know metaphysical truths?
The great battle between the armchair and the laboratory.
A priori versus a posteriori. A priori knowledge is knowledge you can get just by thinking, independent of experience. Logic, mathematics. The classic example is all bachelors are unmarried. You don't need to go out and survey bachelors to know that's true. It's true by definition.
And a posteriori is knowledge that depends on experience. Swans are white. You have to actually go out and look at some swans. And then you might go to Australia, find a black one, and have to change your theory.
Exactly. Now, metaphysics has traditionally claimed to be a largely a priori discipline, a view sometimes called modal rationalism. We use our rational intuition to figure out what is possible and what is necessary.
But can we really figure out the deep structure of the universe just by closing our eyes and thinking really hard? That seems arrogant, maybe?
That is the heart of the controversy. Let's look at the famous twin Earth thought experiment, created by Hilary Putnam. This is designed to test the very limits of our armchair intuition.
Okay, set the scene for us.
Imagine there's a planet out there in the galaxy, twin Earth. It is identical to Earth in almost every single way. It has people who look just like us, speak perfect English. It has lakes, rivers, oceans, and rain. The liquid in those lakes is clear, tasteless, it quenches your thirst, it boils at 100 degrees Celsius, they call it water.
So far, so good. It's just Earth too.
But an astronaut from our Earth lands there. She takes a sample of the liquid back to her lab, and she discovers that chemically, it is not H2O. It has a different, very complex chemical formula. Let's just call it XYZ for short.
Okay, so it looks like water, it acts like water, everyone calls it water, but its hidden chemistry is totally different.
Now, for the metaphysical question, is XYZ water?
My gut reaction, my first thought is yes. If the locals call it water, and it does all the things water does, hydrates you, then it's water. The name just refers to the function.
That is the functionalist intuition. If it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. But most scientists and many essentialist metaphysicians would say no. They would say the word water is a rigid designator for the chemical substance H2O. Water is H2O. That's its essence. If it's not H2O, it's just fool's water. It's a convincing fake, but it's not the real thing.
So they are prioritizing the hidden underlying structure over the surface appearance and function.
Precisely. And this thought experiment leads to a very profound conclusion about how science and metaphysics work together. We discovered that water is H2O through empirical science, a posteriori.
Right, someone had to do the experiments.
But the philosophical claim that water is necessarily H2O, meaning in all possible worlds nothing else could count as water, that is a metaphysical claim that seems to come from our rational reflection a priori.
So science gives us the facts about our world, but metaphysics gives us the modality, the rules about what's possible and necessary.
That's the ideal marriage, yes. But not everyone wants philosophy and science to get married. There's a whole spectrum of views on this project of naturalizing metaphysics.
Okay, let's run through the spectrum.
On one extreme end, you have autonomous metaphysics. This is the old school view. The philosophers are the boss. We define the fundamental categories: substance, universal, essence, causation, from the comfort of our armchairs. Science just comes along later and fills in the details, like coloring in a coloring book that we drew for them.
I'm going to guess that most scientists hate that view.
With a fiery passion. On the other extreme, you have fully naturalistic metaphysics. This is the Ladyman and Ross everything must go view, they say. If fundamental physics doesn't talk about it, it doesn't exist, period. If your metaphysics talks about tables or souls or causation in a way that physics doesn't recognize, then you are just writing elaborate fan fiction.
That's their principle of naturalistic closure. Don't add any extra ingredients to the cosmic soup that aren't in the physicist's recipe.
But there is a middle path, a moderate naturalism. Someone like L.A. Paul is a great proponent of this. She argues that metaphysics is essentially modeling.
Modeling, like how scientists build climate models or models of the atom.
Exactly like that. Scientists build models of the climate or the atom to best explain the data they observe. Metaphysicians build models of reality structure to best explain concepts like possibility, grounding, and how objects can share properties. We use the same tool. Inference to the best explanation.
So we aren't claiming we have a direct hotline to God or some kind of special philosophical insight.
No, we're just saying, look, this model of reality, one that includes, say, grounding, seems to explain the messiness of the world better than any of the alternative models on offer.
I really like that. It makes philosophers partners with science, not kings or servants. We are all model builders. We're just modeling different aspects of the same reality.
Precisely. It's a collaborative project.
So let's try to bring this all home. We started this deep dive by asking if the number 7 exists. We argued about Sherlock Holmes, we shaved Plato's beard with Quine, we stepped into the ontology room, we fell down the rabbit hole of infinite gunk, and we ended up on Twin Earth, drinking a glass of XYZ.
It has been quite a journey, from the simple to the infinitely complex.
But why does any of this matter? To the listener who's driving to work right now, why should they care about metametaphysics? It feels so abstract.
Because it determines the rules of engagement for all of our deepest questions. Look, everyone does metaphysics, whether they know it or not. When you argue about whether a fetus is a person, you are doing metaphysics about identity and properties. When you argue about whether society is to blame for crime, you are using concepts of grounding and structure. When you ask yourself if you have free will, you are asking about determinism and causation.
We are all amateur metaphysicians.
We are. But metametaphysics asks you to check your tools before you start working. Before you try to fix the engine of the universe or your own life, it asks you to make sure you know what a wrench is. Make sure you know what you mean by exists. Make sure you understand that, because grounding is different from caused by. It is quality control for our deepest thoughts.
It's a difference between just flailing around in the dark and actually turning on a flashlight to see what you're doing.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
I want to leave our listener with one final, slightly provocative thought to chew on. We talked a lot about grounding today, this idea that everything must rest on something else. The table rests on the atoms rest on the quarks. We seem to have this deep psychological need for a foundation, a bedrock.
We crave that solid floor beneath our feet.
But what if the gunk theory is right? Or if the web of relations is the right picture of reality? Maybe there is no floor. Maybe reality is, in a profound sense, groundless. Maybe the universe is just designed to float. And maybe our deep anxiety about finding the final answer, the bottom level, is just a human bias we project onto the cosmos. Maybe we just need to learn to be comfortable falling forever.
That is a terrifying and, I think, a beautiful thought. Perhaps the ultimate metaphysical lesson isn't finding the foundation, but realizing that the structure holds itself up and that that is enough.
Be a generic ontological fundamentalist, everyone, or don't. Just keep checking your premises.
Until next time. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.